This is take 2. I ended up spending about 40 minutes discussing this film, but I realized that I spent 30 minutes of that 40 minutes just going off topic. But now that I have gone off topic as much as I can, I now have a refined idea for what I want to do here. So welcome back, or welcome for the first time, to the last voyage of the Demeter. The last voyage of the Demeter is the story of a single chapter in Bram Stoker's novel. And I believe this film only exists, much like Renfield only exists, because Dracula is going to become public domain in 2026. Now, the Dracula story by Bram Stoker is already public domain, but I mean the 1931 Universal movie, Dracula, is going to become public domain by 2026. So expect more Dracula films to come out after this one as well. I imagine you're probably going to get one or two more, as Universal does everything it can to milk this character for as much money as it possibly can. Now, does this feel like a cash grab kind of movie? Yeah, it kind of does. Does this film have an excellent cast? Yeah, it really does. Everybody in this film does the best that they can with what they got, and even does a little bit better than what they got. You know, the captain, who is played by this guy right here, he is excellent in the movie. Doctor Man, I don't know anybody's names, okay, so I'm just gonna be calling the main 5 cast members by their denotations. Captain, Doctor, Boy, Girl, and First Mate. Those are the denotations. Those are the 5 major characters in this film. Dracula is more of like an alien from Ridley Scott's Alien. He's more of just the hidden antagonist that we don't spend too much time with until the end of the film, the big final confrontation. We spend more time with the crew of the Demeter. And we're going to be spending a lot of time with the Demeter because it's a 2-hour movie. We spend about maybe 5 minutes at the Romanian port over the Black Sea, and we spend about maybe 2 to 3 minutes in London, bookending the film. So we do spend mostly 2 hours on the Demeter with the Demeter's cast and Dracula hunting down the cast members one by one. It is very paralleling to the Alien movie, and honestly, it would be a little bit paralleling to John Carpenter's The Thing, especially with how the crew members are distrusting of one another, because 3 of the crew members were picked up at Romania, so some of these people have been with one another for many voyages, and then there's some of these people, including Doctor, who just got signed on at the Romanian port, so not too many people trust one another. There's some people who are superstitious, so it's a pretty good ride, all in all. Now, the gist of the story is from the novel, Chapter 7. If you've read Chapter 7 of the Bram Stoker's novel, you know more or less what happened. As the captain's log would dictate, there is a creature on board that killed, one by one, everybody until everybody died. In the movie, the 1931 Dracula movie, Renfield was the only survivor. I haven't read the Bram Stoker novel in more than 10 years. I cannot remember if Renfield was on this boat, and he also survived, as in that, whatever. But I just recently watched the Dracula movie, so that one's fresher in my mind, so that's the continuity I'm going to be using for relation to this movie's story. There is no Renfield in the last voyage of the Demeter, so that's the major shift right away. Another thing that I spent 20 minutes rambling on is when this film takes place. As we can see here, Doctor is not a European. He is not English. He's from England. He went to school to become a doctor in England, but he is not English. So the film takes place, I want to say, in the 1890s. Most sources that I can find say that the book takes place in the 1890s. I believe it was written, or rather published, in like 1889 or 88. That's what I want to say, at least. 1899 or 90, whatever. The 1890s, right? Right? That's what I want to say this story takes place in, right? So, I have no problems with this casting, because historically, the first doctor out of England of his denotation was in the 1830s, to my knowledge, the first one. And he says in the film that he is one of the first doctors of his denotation to have graduated from an English university. So right away, the time period lines up to be the 1890s. So that's fine for that. The ship looks like it was built in the 1700s, though. The crew looks like they walked out of the 1700s. So there's some clashing here. But it's not a major point of contention, despite going over 20 minutes of what I only needed 2 minutes to explain. The set of the Demeter is an old sailing vessel. And this set is far spookier than using a steamboat, a steamship. By the late 1800s, steam had overgrown sailing for most of the major port cities, but this is clearly, quite obviously, not a major port city in Romania. This is a small port. This is a poor port, so naturally they're probably still going to be using sailing vessels. Sailing vessels were still used throughout the world commercially until, I believe, the early to mid-1900s. By that point, steam had pretty much taken over everything. And then after that, the next powerful boat, the next big evolution of the boats and all that stuff. We're going to be using gas lamps and all this stuff because despite Edison figuring out electricity and all other stuff, and by the 1890s, big cities like maybe London, Manhattan were able to use this fancy new doohickeys. It wouldn't be until the mid-1900s when it was used in commonplace. Most homes, half the world, would have electricity by the mid-1900s. But this is the late 1800s, so naturally this port city is running off gas, so you don't have to spend too much time thinking about that, because I've already thought about that for you. Plot-wise, we have our crew. We're going to be spending the film with just this crew. The extras are at the beginning and the ending of the film in this Romanian port and in London, respectively. We open the film with the Demeter crashing on the rocks in England, and we have some constabulary and Coast Guard people or whatever showing up to investigate, and they find the captain's log, and they're reading the captain's log, and then we flash back to the rest of the movie, which takes place of this in the captain's log. And then, of course, we learn about stuff that happened after the captain died, so... well, yeah, whatever. But, yeah. Chapter 7 dictates how Dracula was able to successfully sail from Romania to London. And nobody on board survived, except for Renfield in the 1930s movie, and if he's in the Bram Stoker book as having been on this vessel, then Renfield survived that too. I don't know why I think Renfield went on ahead of Dracula back to London before the Demeter came. I don't know why I think that in the book. That's what happened in the book. It's been too long for me to confirm that or remember that, right? But yeah, there's no Renfield in this book, in this film, so we don't have to worry about him. There are 2 crates from Transylvania, from the Dracula castle, that are put onto this boat. One of them is a coffin containing Dracula. The second one is a coffin containing his food. The girl. The girl is not a member of the crew, and they're still... This is why I thought this film that took place in the 1700s, because they're very very superstitious about having a woman on board. They're like, we can't have that. We can't do that. Having a woman on board's bad luck, blah blah blah. They're acting like superstitious 1600s, 1700s sailors. Man, this is the late 1800s. This is almost turn of the century into the 1900s. Get with the times, crew. But yeah, they're freaking out about there being a girl stowaway, and they say we should just toss her overboard. And I'm like, dude, this is the late 1800s. Just drop her off at the nearest port, right? That's what I would have done. But no, they're freaking out. But she's unconscious. She has lost a lot of blood, and the doctor says that she needs blood transfusions. So he keeps her in his doctor's quarters to give her blood transfusions. And as the course of the film goes on, one by one, the crew turns up missing or dead. The cattle have all been slaughtered as well. Dracula has been feeding. And then the girl wakes up, and she ends up explaining the rest of the story to Doctor, Captain, and everybody else, that this creature is otherworldly and is basically demonic, devilish in origins, and he needs to be stopped before they make it to London, before they get to any port, because if they get to port, Dracula could escape and continue his reign of terror. But right now, they have him confined to this boat, and this is their best shot at killing him, she says. So, so Doctor decides that they need to take care of that. They need to kill him. And, well, one by one, the crew members still die. The boy and another crew member gets bitten by Dracula. And in this film, the lore, I guess, is there's 2 ways you could be bitten. If you survive a biting by Dracula, you will become a vampire. Or you could just be drank to death and die. So that's usually I guess that's why they justify that the vampire has to drink all of the blood to kill you if he doesn't want you to become a vampire. If he wants you to become a vampire, he only has to drink a little bit of your blood, and then you'll become a vampire afterwards, or whatever, right? And we learn that the girl has been bitten plenty of times, so the transfusions by Dr. Man here is only delaying the inevitable. So at the end of the film, the 2 survivors are Doctor and the girl. Everybody else, the captain, the first mate, everybody else dies. But they failed in taking out Dracula, right? They fail in doing that. But so the Doctor and the girl escape the boat, and they hope that they destroyed him in like an explosion or something. But no, that failed. Everybody failed. And the girl is turning into a vampire, and she opts to burn in the sun rather than survive and become a creature of the night. So the Doctor is the only survivor at the end. And this is where I have a pretty big point of contention, is that he survives and enters London to track down Dracula, kind of in a way of a Nemesis type of scenario that reminds you of Van Helsing and Dracula's rivalry, nemesisness. And we know what Van Helsing is. We know who he is, right? We know what he's denotated. So this is, and he's not named Van Helsing, right? Clemens! His name is Clemens, I think. Clemens starts with a C. Wow, the name just came back to me. Right, he's not Van Helsing. He's Clemens, something with a C. But he survives, and he's there with his narrating voice to tell you that he's going to hunt down Dracula, because Dracula survived, and he needs to get revenge for what happened on the Demeter. But yeah, you know this story. If you've read the book, you know this story. If you've watched the 1931 movie, then you know this story. You know that everybody aboard the Demeter dies except for Dracula, and then the rest of the film happens as a result. So this film doesn't really surprise you with anything. It's just there to fill in the gaps of something that was only passively told to you. Now it's shown to you what happened on the Demeter. At least what this film is taking liberties to show you, because, in the 1931 film, the Renfield was on board the boat. In this, there is no Renfield. He's not on board the boat. So that's where it's taking some liberties. And of course we have here the legend of Dracula is born. I don't know what they're trying to say with that. Maybe they're saying that they're going to try to revive their attempts at making a dark universe. And it's like, yeah, keep trying that, Universal. Because in the 1930s and the 1940s, they did successfully create a cinematic universe with the monster movies. They made the Wolfman, Dracula, Frankenstein, especially with those three big films, right? Wolfman was in the 40s, but Dracula and Frankenstein were in the early 30s, 31 to be precise. And after those films, they made sequels to Dracula and Frankenstein. We have the son of Frankenstein, the son of Dracula, the daughter of Dracula, the Bride of Frankenstein, which is an excellent, probably one of the best films in the monster universe, right? And they end up going to Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, which is taking the stories of Frankenstein and the Wolfman and combining them. And then we have House of Frankenstein, which is combining the Dracula storyline into the Frankenstein and Wolfman storylines. And then we have House of Frankenstein, which is further culminating into a final confrontation between the three, right? And I loved it. I loved that cinematic universe. I watched all those films. It is an excellent time. So I do want Universal to try their best at making another cinematic universe using these monsters. And I would say if this is how they're going to start this, they're going to skip the opening portions. They're not going to do any origin story for the Dracula creature. That they're just going to start right here with the Voyage of the Demeter. If this is their first attempt, or another first attempt at trying to make the dark universe, I'm like, good, go for it. Try your best here if you can. But there are some gripes, Dracula doesn't necessarily look like he's taking on a human form in this film. He doesn't necessarily have to on the Demeter, but once he gets to London, it would make sense for him to do that. But at the ending of this film, we are in London, and he still doesn't look like a human form person. He still looks like a monster, easily identifiable by anybody who actually looks at him. So I don't know how they're going to do that in a sequel. Maybe they'll fix that in the sequel and have him take on a human form. Who knows? Another big problem that we see is at the beginning of the film, he looks very emaciated. He looks very weak. He looks very, very, very malnourished. He looks like Gollum from Lord of the Rings, like a house elf from Harry Potter. He looks emaciated. And at the end of the film, he does end up looking like he's had his fill, because he's eating people. He's rationing his people throughout the journey from. And this trip is going from the Romanian port into the Black Sea, from the Black Sea into the Aegean Sea, from the Aegean Sea out into the outer, wider Mediterranean, and then west into the Atlantic, and then north into London. I believe that is the route, the charter that this boat took. And by the time they finally reached London, everybody is gone, except for the doctor. The doctor survives, but he wasn't on the ship, so I guess that's how they are able to get around the fact that in the captain's log, and when they wrote everybody's names down, they said everybody died. There's nobody on board the Demeter. Everybody's dead, right? He wasn't on board the Demeter when it crashed into London. He abandoned ship with the girl character before it crashed into London. So he got to London a different way, on driftwood. So that's how that worked, so I guess. But, yeah, they're taking a lot of liberties differently from the 30s movie and differently from the book. They're adapting a chapter. They're not doing verbatim the chapter. There wasn't that much material in a single chapter to begin with to do verbatim. They have to make some liberties. They have to spread it out a little bit. And I like the whodunit atmosphere. We know it's Dracula just looking at the cover, but the crew members don't know it's Dracula for a good portion of the movie, and they do their part really well. The 2-hour runtime doesn't feel like it's 2 hours. It feels like about 90 minutes. It is a very watchable film. I would give it a 7 out of 10. I wouldn't give it a 6. I wouldn't give it an 8. I would give it a solid 7 out of 10. It is a very watchable film. If you're into this type of storytelling, if you're into this type of atmosphere, if you love the Universal horror movies, the classic Universal monster movies, if you love those storylines, and you really want them to succeed in retelling those storylines again, then, yeah, The Last Voyage of the Demeter is a good attempt at doing that. I don't know how to end these things, so I'm just going to say, watch it.